So we call these things Scotch Talks. Why do we call them Scotch Talks? Well, it is a name made up by my colleague, Katie Janis, to mean the kind of talk you might have over a glass of scotch, which is great. The only problem is these talks take place in the early afternoon on a Thursday, and that's not generally, just so everybody knows, when I like Kyle, I think Mallory, I hope it's true of you as well, not generally when you are having a nightcap or a drink, but this is the 60s, we don't do that so much here at American Philanthropic, but I do have some scotch in front of me so that we're true to the talk. Kyle, do you have?
I do, yes. I've got a nice little scotch here.
I'm no fun. I have iced tea because it's 1 p.m.
I have Perrier, actually. That's really what I'm drinking, but I can act like I'll have a couple of sips of this. Nicole poured me a very healthy pour for 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
That she did.
Hopefully some of you are
very generous.
You're doing so well with your development program. You're sitting back and having a drink. So the point is, it's very informal and casual and conversational. We're not presenting. There's no deck. We will not be, I don't think we're going to be sharing our screen at any time on this call. We're just talking about tips and tricks for soliciting and cultivating foundations and how to build a strong grants program. So we're going to talk about issues that get to those questions to the extent that we can. We only have an hour, but there's so much that can be said. And we've been hitting this topic a lot right now. We're kind of going through a little phase here where we're talking about foundations and grants and such. So we will get going. I am Jeremy Beer. I am the co-founder of American Philanthropic, principal partner here. With me today are Mallory Staley. I still call her Hayhurst because that's how I knew her. She got married a while ago. She's Mallory Staley now. She's a senior consultant for us, working out of Palmdale?
Santa Clarita. Yeah.
Santa Clarita. Near Palmdale, right?
Yeah, 30 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Santa Clarita, beautiful Santa Clarita, California. Mallory has been with our firm for a few years now. She's a graduate of Arizona State University, where she was involved with the Center for Political Thought and Leadership, studied political science and business management, and really knows grants and foundations very, very well. She does a lot of that work for us. So welcome, Mallory.
Thanks for having me.
And Kyle Vander Meulen is our other guest. Kyle is our managing consultant out of our Oak Park, Illinois office. Beautiful Oak Park, Illinois. Kyle is, among other things, a volunteer docent for the Frank Lloyd Wright,
Home and Studio.
Thank you. Home and Studio in Oak Park, which is really
in
cool.
Oak Park, yep.
If you're ever there, check it out. Maybe Kyle will be your guide.
Give you a tour, yeah.
Kyle is a graduate of George Washington University, where he studied religion. Then he studied religious ethics in graduate school at the University of Chicago, went on to work for Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, all of which I tell you because Kyle understands faith, which is a very important component of trying to get a grant. You must have faith.
True.
In the process, faith and things unseen, right? Kyle is also leads a lot of trainings and stuff for us in this on this topic. So very happy to have him here. Hello, Kyle.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy.
So the hard part of this is we're talking to each other and kind of talking to a void with respect to people, except through the chat. So we'll do our best. Let me just introduce the topic a little bit. I'm gonna ask you guys some questions, kick things off, and then we'll just see where this goes. We're talking about foundations. We're talking about private foundations. So people know private charitable foundations. There are about 90,000 private foundations, I believe, in America today. We don't have an exact number. Maybe it's closer to 100,000 by now. It's a lot. There's a lot. It's not like Gates and Walton and like that's it. There's many, many, many private foundations in the United States. They gave away in 2019 about $76 billion. For context, individuals gave away just over 300 billion in 2019. I think it was 310. Corporations only gave away 21 billion. So foundations are really, really important part of the private giving pie, if we're going to put it that way. Government money into nonprofit swamps everything. So just kind of put that off to the side. But if you're just talking about private giving from individuals, foundations, corporations, foundations are a really big part of it. About 17% of all charitable giving in the United States comes through foundations. And it's even more than that for a lot of our clients anyway, right? The clients we work with, guys, I think it's often 30, 35%, maybe
Yeah,
even.
at least a quarter, right?
Yeah, it gets lower as you get bigger. Typically, I'm just as all this background for people, right? So, if you're a $20 million, $50 million, $100 million nonprofit, foundations might be a smaller percentage for you than they would be for a smaller nonprofit.
Right.
So if you are a smaller nonprofit, and many of the people on this call work for those or run them, it probably should be a very significant piece of the pie for you. So that's just the context. That's why we give this a lot of attention and why we're having this talk today. So, Kyle, let's start with you. Let's just start from the beginning a little bit. We're not going to do too basics. I want to get to the tips and the tricks, but like, how do you start? How do you find foundation prospects for your nonprofit, and how do you start trying to contact them?
Yeah, I think the best way to find new foundation prospects is to see who is giving in the foundation sphere to organizations, to missions that are comparable to your own. So I think some people kind of go in thinking that, going back to the religious language, that they have to convert a foundation. That's really not the way to start your foundation program, right? Like, you're not going out there trying to convert them on the value of whatever your mission or organization is. You want to preach to the choir, right? You want to find those people that already have been investing in causes, organizations that are similar to your own. There's many ways that you can kind of go about starting that process. We definitely recommend using search tools like GuideStar, Foundation Directory. iWave is another one that's really helpful. And kind of almost like you're doing like an investigative search, you start backwards, right? You start with the organizations that you know that are similar to the work that you're doing, and then look up to see who is funding them, and then look at those foundations to see if this might be a good fit for your organization. It really is all about making that connection between what the foundation's either stated or unstated mission and philanthropic kind of vision is, and the work that you're doing. And what you're doing is trying to pair and really marry the two so that you enter into a kind of partnership where they're supporting you because of the work that you're doing.
Excellent. We'll come back if you have how you find foundations. Actually, though, let me follow up with that, Kyle, one more thing. How do you, so, all right. So you found, for whatever reason, we can go back if you want to talk about it more, how you find foundation prospects. You found 10 good ones. You think they're aligned with you. They're also based in Georgia, to make something up. And they give to organizations who are doing things in Georgia and in the fine arts. And that's what you're into. That's what you guys you're doing. So they look like they're a good fit. So how do you start? How do you reach out to them, especially if they say no unsolicited requests or unsolicited applications not accepted?
Yeah, well, this goes a little bit to the importance of foundation research, right? You want to put in your homework before you reach out to a foundation. They're getting requests from all over the state of Georgia, so you want to make sure that you know how they want to be approached. If the foundation has a website, they might have guidelines on there. Highly recommend that everyone take the time to read through the guidelines and follow whatever the procedures that they've listed on the website are. Many times you will find that a foundation does not have a website, and all of your information is going to be based on the foundation's IRS Form 990. 990 is a tax form that every foundation has to fill out. It's a very helpful document. We have several resources that we can share with the folks on the call after about how to kind of read a 990, how to find the information within the 990 that you need and why it's important. But a lot of times on that 990, there is a section where a foundation can fill out whether or not they take unsolicited proposals, or even put information in there about how they want to be solicited. Many foundations will simply check that box that says that they don't want to take unsolicited proposals because they get a lot of unsolicited requests, and oftentimes the requests don't necessarily fit with the foundation's mission. So they kind of do that as a way of weeding out, massive amounts of inquiries that come into the foundation. If a foundation has that box checked, though, and you do feel like there is a fit and there's clearly a reason that you should be engaging with them, I would still highly recommend that you reach out to that foundation in some way. The best way, maybe, or the easiest way to do it would be through what we call a letter of inquiry. That's a very basic letter, 2 pages, maybe 3 at most, that just introduces your organization to the foundation. Now, it is not a grant proposal and it is not a grant request. What it is really a request for a conversation, or if meetings are available, you might do a meeting, right? So it's just that introduction, right? It's just kind of trying to make that connection between the work that you're doing and the programs that the foundation is funding. And it's a great way to kind of kick it off and start it. Having said that, I would also highly recommend you use that Foundation 990, you use your research to identify any possible connections that you have, right? Do you know anyone on the board? Do you know any foundation officers that work at the foundation? If you don't, even looking at the list of grantees and saying, okay, we partnered with this other fine arts organization on a performance 2 years ago. It was a great performance, right? Draw that connection out in the letter so that the person reading it can identify, okay, this is someone who is in our world. They understand the work that we're doing. They're connected to the fine arts community in Georgia. So you're trying to find those links and connections and kind of leverage whatever possible connections you have as you're making that initial connection with the foundation.
Mallory, 2 questions for you. First of all, will foundations actually meet with people? Let's put COVID aside. Okay, just like put that out. But in normal times, which hopefully are not very far away from us now again, do foundations meet with you? And is that something you should try to get a meeting? And then second question for you, there are staff, we hear about staffed foundations and non-staffed foundations, and how does that difference play into what Kyle's talking about here?
Absolutely. So yes, foundations will meet with you. And in fact, getting a meeting is oftentimes a really good first step before you even submit a proposal or some kind of formal request. And it's really about relationship building. And we say all the time that foundations are people too, right? So there's a board of directors or there's a family behind a foundation in many cases. And so building the relationship with them through that meeting not only gives you tips and tricks for what to put in the proposal, right? I mean, they may tell you request 50,000 for this project, or first time grants only going to be 10,000, and then it may go up from there. So that meeting is really helpful just to guide that process. And to your second question about staffed versus non-staffed foundations, this is a really important differentiation because you would approach those two a little differently, right? So a staffed foundation might have, $800 million in assets. So they give out $40 million at least in gifts each year, or 5%. So they're giving out more money to more grantees. And it's possible that they're constantly looking for new grantees to support that are aligned with their mission. So, and with that in mind, because they're giving out so much money, they have a staff, they have an executive director and program officers, and people that it's their job to literally go find groups that the foundation might want to support and respond to letters of inquiry, as Kyle was mentioning. So they probably have a website, they probably have a phone number that somebody will actually answer the call on the other end. They probably have some kind of general email that you can, contact. So it's a little easier to approach a staffed foundation because they have an actual application process, and they're probably going to respond to you whether it's favorable or unfavorable. A family foundation, on the other hand, is much smaller. It might just be a husband and wife, a couple of their kids. Maybe the grandparents started the foundation and now it's trickled down to their grandchildren running the show. But there's a couple people behind it that are really driving the giving. And so, yes, you would ask them for a meeting just like you'd ask an individual donor for a meeting. You treat them very similar, even though they're just choosing to use that foundation as their giving vehicle. So those are the main two
No, that's really good. So an unstaffed foundation is what it sounds like. It's a foundation that doesn't have any paid staff.
Yeah.
And they operate often much like a major donor operates. It's just a giving vehicle for a family or for an individual or whatever. And so you're going to want to treat that kind of foundation much like you would a major donor prospect.
Absolutely.
It can be a less formal process sometimes, right, Mallory? Maybe usually they're not going to have the more complicated. This isn't like applying to the John Templeton Foundation.
They don't have an online portal. No, they may, just take a short request letter and send you a check. It
They'll
can be a
be
lot simpler.
usually less interested in your theory of change.
That's right.
Yes.
Favorite. It used to be a favorite phrase. I don't know if they're still using that.
It is. They're still using it. Yes.
We have a couple of questions. I want to go ahead and pop in here now before we get further, because this one relates to what we're talking about, Mallory. Okay, let's say you get a meeting with a foundation officer. Who should be involved? Who should go to that meeting from a nonprofit?
Yeah, so it depends on how your nonprofit is staffed, right? I mean, if you're a large multi-million-dollar nonprofit that has major gifts officers, maybe you assign the major gift officer to that foundation to build the relationship just like they would an individual donor. But if you're a smaller group and it's a foundation that has the capacity to give you a gift that could be potentially transformational, you're going to send your executive director or your CEO a lot of times.
Yeah. The highest person who has time would be my answer.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But that's very well put. Now, you also might, if you're a very big nonprofit again, or medium size, you might also want to send a program officer if you are asking for a program director, if you are asking for money for some specific initiative, or you want to ask for money for
somebody that can answer the questions that they may have. Right.
Yeah. So unlike the development person who's just kind of BSing their way through it, the program person might know what he or she is talking about.
That's right.
So good. I answered somebody's question. All right. Let's see. Okay, Mallory, back to you, and then we'll go back to Kyle. And then we'll get back to questions that are being asked here. But somebody did ask this one before. They said 5. They don't know why. We don't have to answer this in BuzzFeed style. But what are 5 important things or characteristics of a strong grants program? You want to take a crack at that?
I have 6, so I do not have 5.
One extra. Great.
So first thing, if you are launching a foundation's program from scratch or trying to revitalize your program, and say you want to take your organization from just 10% of your annual revenue from foundations to 20%. You're going to need a plan to do that. If you have a goal in mind, you need to put together a plan. It doesn't need to be super formal, but maybe a 12 to 18 month plan, which is about the amount of time it's going to take for you to see any real success.
Super important, by the way, right?
Yes, 12 to 18 months. Yes. And that's because, foundations, they may have one board meeting a year and it's in November. So if you send an LOI in February, you're not going to hear back until the following year, literally. So you need to just keep that in mind, especially as, you're going through this process and it can be really grueling and you're getting rejections and you're calling wrong phone numbers. Stay the course for 12 to 18 months and you're likely to see some success. So with that plan, a lot of times we advise clients to build a prospect list. So like Kyle was saying, look at similar groups and who's giving to them and build a prospect list for yourself. If you're trying to raise $2 million in new foundation revenue, you're probably going to need to approach hundreds of prospects, 200, 300 prospects at least. So, if you build that list of 200 to 300, or maybe you build it over time, you'd be sending out a couple dozen LOIs, letters of inquiry, every single month. So that was my second point. So first point, make a plan, build a prospect list. Number 2 is send out letters of inquiry constantly. You need to be doing it every single month so that you have just multiple lines in the water. So even if your foundation's program is at the level of revenue that you want it to be, you still need to be sending out LOIs because you're not going to retain every single foundation funder that you have. Number 3 is a very dedicated follow-up process. So find somebody at your organization that likes to do cold calls and have them dedicated to at least 4 to 5 methods of follow-up per letter of inquiry that you send.
No one, by the way, does this. And then they complain that it's not successful, right, Kyle? We hear this all the time. So we were just talking to somebody the other day, a client that's, follow-up isn't their thing so much. If you don't follow up, you won't have to, don't even into this game.
It is the most important part of the foundation's program is the follow-up. And that's just because you're going to mail that letter of inquiry, but you might not have mailed it to the right person. You might not have mailed it to the right address, or maybe they just never got it. I mean, the post office never delivered it, or it got mixed in the shuffle. So you really need, the first thing you're doing when you're following up is making sure that they got the letter in the first place. And 9 times out of 10, they say they didn't for whatever reason, whether it's true or not. So that phone call, assuming that you do reach another human on the other end, and that's where the research really comes into play, is making sure they receive the letter, and then having the opportunity, if they did not, to email it directly to the exact person that needs to see it. So I would say that it's just very common. If you get on the phone and you have a conversation with someone, they will give you an email address that you would never have found on the 990. You would have never found it online. So that picking up the phone is really important. Some people like to just send emails, and emails can definitely get you one step closer to submitting a proposal. But picking up the phone is where you just find those little tidbits of information that you wouldn't have otherwise figured out, because it's really easy for them to just not respond to your email. So I like to make at least 2 phone calls and do 2 emails. And a lot of times it's a bad email, so you've got to go, find a better one through your research. But you really just won't hear back from an unstaffed foundation unless you're reaching out multiple times and your persistence is so annoying that they feel the need to respond to you, whether they're requesting a proposal or denying your request. So that's number 3, follow-up, most important thing. Number 4, if you do get to the proposal stage, and it will happen if you are reaching out to hundreds of foundations that are aligned with what you're doing, you will get requests for proposals. I think it's really important to just stress not to send the exact same proposal to every single foundation. Craft the proposal like you would a resume for your dream job. You really need to pay attention to what they've funded before. If they have a geographic focus, which is a really good question to ask in a meeting or on the phone, like, hey, do you prefer to only fund things in Atlanta, Georgia? I will make sure, assuming you have a national, program, that I hone in on what we're doing in Atlanta, Georgia. And then the other thing with proposals is just make sure they're written well. Take care in the foundations. Do not leave typos or obvious misspellings of names, the foundation name, the program officer, the executive director, whoever you're addressing the proposal to. Make sure that it's written well. That's really important. And it doesn't have to be 20 pages long. It just needs to be thorough. So if it's general operating proposal that's covering everything you do, it's probably going to be at least 10 pages, but make sure it's thorough. 4th thing, once you get that new grant, we kind of touched on this, but cultivating. You treat that foundation like you would an individual donor. You update them on what you're doing. Especially if they fund a particular program and you're seeing great success with that program, let them know. They want to hear that stuff. So don't leave them out of your regular cultivation pipeline. And it can just be as simple as sending an email quarterly or picking up the phone and just giving them a quick update. If you release a new annual report, make sure to FedEx it to them. And then try to meet with them once a year, because that also really helps for cultivation. And more foundations are fine with Zoom calls. So that's even more convenient to meet with them once a year by Zoom. And then the 6th thing, my final point, is to track every piece of information that you gather from those phone calls and those emails and the rejection letters that you might get, or the award letters. Because you may not always be the person running the foundations program. And if you want future people to be successful and you want your foundations program to be successful, you need to keep track of, oh, they said the board meeting's in December. So every single year, I need to send something by October 31st or whenever it might be. And they said that they have a geographic focus. So when I do get invited to submit the proposal, I want to make sure that I touch on that. And then the gatekeeper, if you happen to figure out who that is, the person that's really behind the scenes on the foundation, they might not be on the 990. You figure out their name, their email, their phone number, put it straight into your database. So yeah, those are my 6 things, Jeremy. I hope that I hope that's enough information.
That's a class in and of itself. I'm trying to keep up with some questions that are coming in on the chat, the Q&A. I am seeing them. So we're going to answer them. I'm going to ask Kyle first, one more sort of setup sort of thing, and then I think we'll probably just start diving into your questions, and I'll make up others if we need to. Mallory talked a little bit, Kyle, about a couple of the good characteristics of a good proposal. What I mean, making them well written, and that's it's amazing how many are not. So it's well worth mentioning. But can you mention I haven't prepared you for this, but do you have a couple of other, what other traits make a proposal stand out? I've got a couple things I'd add to it maybe, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to think in a very simple construct of something like problem, and we can draw this out further, but just to kind of start, problem, solution, and impact is kind of a really helpful way to think about it, right? So let's say the problem is, people are out of work and are having difficulty feeding their families. The solution is your local food bank. And the impact is that, if the foundation gives $25,000, that will allow your organization to feed 100 families for the month of March. Now we can go kind of further into that, but at a very basic level, I think it's important to identify what the problem is, identify how your organization is solving that problem, and then what the impact is. Now, I think in a kind of another mindset, you don't just want to talk at a foundation. As much as possible in the proposal, you want to bring them into that kind of conversation, right? So this is why they might be interested in the solution that you're offering to this particular problem. So kind of going back to what Mallory said, like, you don't just want to send the same letter, the same proposal to every foundation. Totally fine, and definitely highly recommended that you would have a template proposal, that you have language that's been developed that you can work out and customize for these different foundations. But you want that customization is very important. So why should this particular foundation care about the work that you're doing? And not only that, but what does their gift mean to your organization? What will that gift allow you as an organization to do that you might not otherwise be able to do? So that's kind of the very general tips or whatnot that I would recommend in structuring a proposal, or the things that you want to make sure you have in there.
Yeah, I just going to add, Kyle, that um, a couple things. First of all, you should be bold. Be bold. Like, people are attracted to a bold vision, and it's a lot of the trouble we have with some of our clients is like not wanting to put a bold vision out there. Maybe that's not, you're gonna get there in 5 years or 10 years, but something that's like exciting. Exciting's good.
Yeah.
So challenge. If your CEO doesn't want to be exciting, you're bored, like challenge them on that. We got to be exciting to stand out. Also a good model, like some like really thoughtful model for what you're doing, how it's different than what other people are doing is really important too. Just another kind of thing people don't think enough about, like how tight is our model? How much sense does it make? Like there's some proof points in here that makes sense. We're drawing for some lesson learned from another industry or from another sector of the nonprofit world, and we're applying it here for the first time. Like that's the kind of stuff that can really get your attention, especially in more sophisticated foundations. So put those things in there too. Yeah, problem, solution, it's all very important. That kind of how we're going to measure our success too. It's another thing people want to pull back from on the nonprofit side. Often like, well, let's not commit to. You're going to have to commit to something. If you really want to get money, you have to commit. Like we're going to have 10,000 kids enrolled in our X program by 2023. Hey, if you don't make it, if you build a good relationship with a funder in the meantime, they're going to understand why, as long as you've been giving it your best shot, like COVID happens, right? Or something. So those are just a few extra things I would throw in there. All right. We got questions like stacking up in the Q&A. One of our questions has very patiently been waiting. I will give her a question here, whichever you want to answer it. What tips do you have for development shops that have only one person in charge of most grants? What does it look like to expand beyond that? And how do you suggest going about that without stepping on toes or losing your organization's voice? Any thoughts on that?
I can chime in. Well, first, I mean, to put ourselves in there a little bit, this is one of the things that we do is partner with organizations that have limited staff in helping them to set up and run their foundation's program. So we would love to have a conversation about that. There are also, grant writers that you could find and support staff that you could get, so you don't have to necessarily hire a full-time foundations officer just to run your foundations program. There's a lot of options out there. But really, I do think, going back to kind of what I had mentioned before, really thinking through the language that you want to use to communicate to foundations can be very helpful, and having various templates available, it takes time to do. And I know that a lot of people, when their plate is full, might want to just rush and throw something together, but then you find that you're throwing something together every month. You're doing the same process. Taking that step back and really thinking through, what do we want to present in a foundation proposal? What is our unique advantage that we bring to this sphere or sector or problem? Like, why is our solution the solution that people should really be partnering with us on? So taking that time to think about those questions. And I like kind of even building out like a communications document, so that, you know, if you ran into a foundations person at a conference or on the elevator, you could give a one-sentence pitch about what your organization does and why it's important. Then let's say you are seated next to him or her at the dinner table, you could have a light conversation about your organization. Then if they invited a proposal, you could have a 10-page nice proposal that really makes the case for your organization. Takes time to do. If you're not a good writer, there are many, many good writers that you could work with and talk through. It's really helpful to kind of get that feedback from other people. Maybe you have existing foundations that you could even ask and invite their opinion on that. You know, how could I improve my pitch? How could I improve the way that I'm talking about the problem and the work that we're doing? And I would think that if they're a strong partner and supporter, they'd be more than happy to have that conversation with you. But taking the time, I think, to flesh out that language and really think through your organization, what they're doing, could be very helpful. I'll throw it to Mallory, because she's very good and has a lot of ideas on like developing the systems and plotting that out in various databases and whatnot that can really help you, so you're not just like scrambling and looking through emails to kind of find what you need to do on any given day.
Yeah, so thanks, Kyle. I know Jason had asked about this in the chat box about where to track things. So I think, you know, obviously, if you are starting a foundations program from scratch or trying to revamp the existing program, I mean, that's a full-time job. If you're really going after millions in new revenue, that's a full-time job. So to the original question, you know, yeah, you're going to need some support on that, right? It's not like if you're the executive director, you're going to be able to run the foundations program and the major gifts program, you know, and programs and what have you. So I think it's really important to have some kind of template, like Kyle was saying, the 10-page document. Have a general operating template and have program specific templates that you can pull from. Don't try to reinvent the wheel every time you do craft a proposal, but like we said earlier, try to make it different for each foundation that you approach. So if you are, you know, reaching out to dozens of new prospects every single month and crafting these proposals, I like to put every single thing in the database that I can. If you know, you use Salesforce or Virtuous or Razor's Edge or what have you, hopefully you have the ability or access to somebody who knows your database well enough to build that out for you. If you're like, hey, it would be really great to have a field in each foundation accounts for the online portal login, or for the upcoming board member deadlines or board meeting deadline, then build that out and make the CRM work for you. And then what I use on the side is actually called Airtable. So it's a free app up to about 1,200 records. So if you're starting a program from scratch, you'd be able to use it for free for a couple of years at least. But it's very inexpensive if you get to the premium level anyhow. But it's cloud-based, it's collaborative. So multiple people can be in the base at the same time entering data, and it's going to save everything. You can filter and group for certain things, so it just helps you stay organized. So if you are running the program by yourself, or maybe you have some administrative support, making sure that everyone is on the same page by tracking things in the database. And then if you want to have kind of a tracking sheet where you can see everything full picture at any time, especially if your database is not put together enough to kind of give you everything you need to track in it, Airtable's great. just please don't use a spreadsheet or a Word document that's going to get lost in the shuffle. Please use something cloud-based. So Google Sheets or Airtable work great for that. But I do err on the side of putting every single thing in the database if I can.
I think that's a good rule generally for your development program.
Yeah.
And it's something to work towards always, because it'll always be degrading. So you always have to be recommitting yourself to that. A couple of more questions here we should get to. I'll take this first one, and then I'll kind of hand one over to you, Mallory. From the Q&A, you talk about having hundreds of prospects. I feel like I'm struggling to get even a handful of solid leads because of geographical and program restrictions. Should I spend time sending LOIs to foundations that are a real long shot? Good question. Thank you for it. I'm sorry you're only finding a handful of solid leads. I don't know what your geographical and program restrictions are, of course. But yeah, I wouldn't go too long of a shot, I guess. I mean, I would stretch a little bit. I would really be trying to get creative on how I package my program. Is there, even though these people say that, you know, I'm in Delaware only or something like that, is what I'm doing somehow replicable? Can I share what I'm doing with people in other regions, and therefore I can maybe compete for money in Pennsylvania or Maryland and so on? Thinking creatively like that maybe will help you. We've seen that work sometimes. It's as I say, it's at least a medium shot. So I would, otherwise though, it may be, given your geographical and program restrictions, that foundations are going to be a smaller piece of the pie for you. So you don't have to fight this forever, right? If you really do have restrictions like that, that are really limiting for you, I would turn my attention towards individuals and corporations and, you know, other sources of revenue probably, and not just bang my head on the wall. You guys have anything you want to add to that?
That covers it on my end. Yeah. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is that many communities have community foundations. There's a huge community foundation in Chicago. I live in a town of about 50,000, and we have a community foundation, and they're often trying to host events for local foundations and local organizations. So get plugged in to whatever umbrella organization for nonprofits might be in your community. That can be a helpful resource to have.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Hope that's helpful. Okay, Mallory, question from the Q&A. What are your general thoughts on approaching prospective foundations for general support versus project-specific support? Great question.
Yeah, I have a great question. You always want to try to get general operating support if you can. Isn't it nice to be able to spend money on whatever your program needs may be? But that is something that is really going to be determined by hopefully a meeting with the foundation or conversations over the phone. When you're invited to submit a proposal, oftentimes it might be, you know, the board president, especially if they're a really important multimillionaire, you know, they're going to have their assistant reach out to you, or secretary or something like that, to request a proposal. And a lot of times they don't give a lot of direction if it's a family foundation and they don't have set guidelines. So I like to ask, like, hey, you know, it sounds like so-and-so is really interested in our programs. You know, do you think that they would fund general operating, or should we hone in on a specific project? You know, maybe they had a conversation and the board member said, I really like this program that they're doing, request a proposal. So it's nice to ask, and you know, if they don't give you what you need, I like to do general operating and just try to give more of a long form proposal, give more information on every program. And then if you request, you know, a gift of $50,000 or whatever, they might give you 20 specifically for one program. So it's really up to them what they're going to fund. There are foundations that will not give you general operating support. And hopefully they have a website and they've stated that somewhere for you before you submit the proposal. But anytime you can, try to get Gen Ops funding so that you can spend it on whatever you want.
But Kyle, it's true, right, that foundations make grants for Gen Ops support much more than people tend to claim.
Yes, yeah, I think there's that mindset that, well, they only want to give to a particular project, and so you have to like almost create a project in order to get foundation support. But I would counter that and think that a lot more general operating support is out there and available than people think. And I would also say that even sometimes, like I've seen this many times, where they came in off of a project and then after that it essentially became general operating support. Now they might call it, like if it's a school, they might call it like the technology and education project, but it's part of your general operating funds that essentially they're giving.
This is a really good point. Repackaging what you already do or
Yeah.
want to do as an initiative, as a program or something, like that's really smart. You got to do that so that you can compete for this money. From our survey that we do of nonprofits, almost 60% of grant revenue went towards general operating support. So more than half. And as you build relationship with the foundation, the more likely you are to be able to transition, if you need to transition, to get general operating support. That's number one. Number two, as Kyle said, repackage what you do as a program or something, and then you essentially are supporting stuff you're already committed to. And the third thing is, and it's funny how this is somebody asked about rookie errors in the Q&A, and I'll get to that specific question, but this is another rookie error. Call it the scrupulosity error. Hey, they say they only do program funding, so only the very direct cost of this program should be included in the budget that we submit. No.
Yeah.
No, you can't do the program without the people who are running it. So their salaries and benefits, the office you're officing out of most likely, right? Or the space you're using, the technology you depend on, the marketing to get the word out. All that needs to be reflected in your budget. Build it in. My goodness.
Yep.
Do not cut yourself off at the knees out of some sort of over scrupulous, interpretation of the grant guidelines. Now, government grants I know can be different and they may be very specific, but most of the time, vast majority of the time with foundations, you can build that stuff into your program budget.
Yeah, and one other thing, Jeremy, is even if they give you a general operating grant, in your report, you can kind of drill down on some of the things that they are interested in. And that they're interested in them from your meeting or emails or communications where they said, hey, this program's really cool. So even if they give you an unrestricted grant, which is awesome, and that's, what you want, you can still spend a little bit more of your, report on something that they're specifically interested in or geographic area that they're in.
Fantastic. All right. Here's a question. I'll give this to Kyle. What percentage of time should a seasoned grant writing team spend finding new prospects?
That's a good question. I would think it should take a decent amount of your time. So I would be spending about a quarter of my time looking for new foundation prospects, especially if you're, as they say, a seasoned team. That makes me think you've got an organization that is of a size where you're not just one person. Always be looking out for new foundation prospects and contacts. I mean, and this goes even like beyond kind of the Guide Star and the things that I had mentioned before, looking at annual reports from other organizations. If you're a community organization or you're kind of in with a specific community, looking at who is funding the symphony, getting the playbill after every performance to see, kind of scan who's out there. Universities, looking on campus, who's funding the new building. Always be looking out for new foundation prospects.
Yeah, that's that kind of guerrilla research actually is really helpful. It's, you subscribe to the symphony or opera just to get the program, basically. Yeah. And I drive my staff crazy by taking pictures of every donor wall I come across.
Yep.
And sending it along. Hey, these people might be useful for some of our clients. So you should, if you're a development officer, you should be taking pictures of donor walls and trying to figure out who these people are. All right, there's another question in the Q&A, and then I'll get to some of the questions that were sent ahead of time. Mallory, by the way, I don't have a specific answer for this question. I wonder what you'll say. What are the rookie errors that strike a tin note with foundations that should be avoided? Like any buzzkill words or phrases or approaches that's like, and if you say that, that just marks you out as a rook.
Yeah, I don't think that there's anything that specifically comes to mind as buzz, words that are going to tick off every foundation, right? Like there could be specific, foundations that don't like certain things. And like Tom Riley said on last week's webinar, if you know one foundation, you know one foundation. They are all different. But I just think it's really important, and we said this already, but just don't have typos and careless errors in your proposal. Make sure that you take care and you tailor the proposal to the foundation. So if they have a website and they have a stated mission, stated focus area, make sure that you mention those words in your proposal, again, like you would a resume for your dream job. Putting those little buzzwords that you know that they use, and they're going to say, oh, hey, I know, that's what those words we use all the time. So yeah, that's my only advice there.
That's good. I like that. If they use the words human flourishing, you might want to use the word human flourishing. Now, I wouldn't repeat it back exactly. I wouldn't repeat their mission back exactly as if it's your mission, but yeah, incorporating some of that language. So it's kind of a rookie mistake to not do what Mallory was talking earlier and not customize your, people can smell a non-customized mass mailing kind of a mile away. When you open it anyway, you can smell it, right? It's like, oh, this isn't for us. They did not write this just for us. This is something they sent to everybody. That's why sometimes I have clients like, why don't we just send it to 1,000 foundations right now? Well, it won't work.
Well, and even just sending it, dear Smith Foundation Board of Directors, don't do that. Figure out who the executive director is, figure out who is going to be really driving that gift if they're interested in what you're doing.
All right, let me go to one of the earlier questions sent to us. I think, Mallory, you said you would answer this one, so you can try it if you want. Do you have any specific system you like for evaluating, ranking, tracking, and moving along foundation prospects? Now, you already talked about tracking a little bit and moving along, but what about this evaluating and ranking thing? Do you have anything?
Yeah, so Airtable has a cool feature where it's a star feature. So, if they're super aligned with what you're doing and they have the right geographic focus and what have you, you could, rank them as 5 stars. Or if they don't have the capacity to make gifts over a certain level and you're really looking for larger funders, then you could rate them at a 1 or what have you. So that's the ranking system that I use, especially when it comes to figuring out low-hanging fruit. I'm going to go with those 5-star foundations before I turn to the 4, 3, or 2-star foundations. But yeah, I use Airtable. It's a moves management tracking sheet. And it also, has the contact information in there. It has the initial approach. So everything I need is right there in Airtable, and it's also in the database, which if you're the type of person that you can just operate out of your database and you have a well-oiled machine where you can run reports, and the My Tasks feature in Salesforce is great for logging activities, then don't feel like you have to have a separate tracking sheet. But I like Airtable a lot. So
the other way I formalize this kind of evaluation and ranking thing is with 4. There are like 4 criteria that we'll look at when we're evaluating how good a prospect is. Geographic fit. Sometimes, as I said before, it's like we do things in Maryland and you're in Washington. Well, that's not a very good geographic fit. So that's going to be a problem. We have to figure something out if you're going to try there. Geographic fit, philosophical fit. So that's just the alignment, mission-wise, values-wise. The third thing we look at is accessibility. How easy is it to get in front of this foundation? Now, sometimes you don't know that, but you do know they have a website and a portal by which they have an open application process. That's accessible. If they're like hidden and you only found them through a 990 and they don't have any sort of process, that's fairly inaccessible. And you don't have any connection there. And then the fourth thing we look at is capacity. Not just how much do they have in assets, but how much are they giving away every year, right? Because that's a big difference, right, guys? You can have a foundation that has only $1 million in assets, but it gives away $10 million a year because they're just using the foundation as a vehicle for the hedge fund guy, who's making the money behind. He flows into the foundation and it goes out right away. Other foundations have a lot of assets, 50 million, 100 million or more, and aren't giving away that much. Sometimes they're not even giving away their 5% on a regular basis anyway. So anyway, those are the criteria I look at, and I you can rank them all. And if you want to get fancy, you can get them in a weight, come up with a composite score, but that will help you can sort at least by those.
I would just add one thing to that, Jeremy, and that would be any personal connection that you have with the foundation, because that's really important, and you should definitely try to leverage if you know the board members or program officers, or again, if you've had any connection with the grantees that they've already been supporting, really try to take advantage of that, because at the very least, that will get them to think of you as something other than, one of 100 applicants.
That's
It'll be,
right.
oh, right, it's John's friend or cousin or whatever.
Anything you can do to stand out and to build credibility and get past the initial, like, we can write this one off. That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So the dropping names of people or organizations or both in your letter of inquiry, if that's how you're first approaching a foundation, or your meeting request letter, where you're trying to get a meeting, is really, really important. The other thing you can do, here's another tip or trick, is, okay, let's say you have a board member who knows the foundation, but you can't get them off the schneid to like make an intro for you, or they don't want to use their capital in that way for some reason. It's a lot easier oftentimes for people to follow up on your behalf. So instead of waiting for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months for, Sally Jones to make the intro that you've been waiting on, sometimes what you want to do is send the letter or send the application, whatever the case may be, and ask. Now you can say, Sally, we went ahead and we've applied. Would you mind just shooting a note to Joe just to keep an eye out for our application? And that will help you stand out. And that's so much easier for the person you're asking to help do a little bit of work on your behalf to do. You don't feel like you're expending as much capital doing that. You're just like giving a heads up. So I think think about things like that you can do. It doesn't have to be a board member. It could be anybody that you know who knows who you're writing to and can put, just do a quick follow-up email. Super important. All right. Sorry. Okay. I'm getting distracted. Let's see here. Questions and answers are going to just going oldest to newest. When you say a quarter of a team's time is looking for prospects, this is for you, Kyle. Do you structure that as one person full-time on a staff of 4, or is it better to have each team member prospect and pursue the opportunities they find and continue?
Yeah. So I think it kind of depends on your team and what their skills are. There's benefits to both, right? I mean, there's benefits to someone whose entire job is to kind of be thinking about who is out there that we should be connecting with and communicating with, and really gets to know the systems and the 990s and how all of these things operates, because there are kind of these tips and things that you learn as you go along. On the other hand, that's a lot of time and effort. And it can also be good to have someone who's kind of doing both, right? Identifying the prospects, translating that into real communications and text that you're going to be putting out there. So I know it's not a great answer, but it really does depend on the skills of your team and kind of where they're at. I mean, we're at American Philanthropic, we're probably more generalists, where we encourage people to learn everything from kind of A to Z, so that at the very least they can kind of pitch in if needed. So my inclination would be to get everyone on board with all the aspects of the foundation program, and then identify, recognize strengths and skills among your colleagues and kind of put them on the parts of the process that they might be best or most efficient at working.
Mallory, any tips to help program staff know what details to think through or narrative to put together that helps advancement write an LOI or proposal? It's a great question.
Yeah. So generally, I mean, it would be the advancement team kind of asking the program staff for certain statistics or details on the programs to put into those materials. And whoever's writing your letters of inquiry or proposals, they might say, hey, we need a little bit more detail here or there to help with your template. So the biggest thing I would just say is sometimes program staff aren't thinking about tracking numbers. They're thinking about maybe growing the program or just simply making the program happen, which is great. But a lot of foundations and donors just want to know the numbers, like, hey, you served 100 kids last year. How many kids did you serve this year? And what are your goals for the next 3 years? So another element of a strong foundation proposal is going to be strategic priorities for the next 3 years, which are oftentimes going to include your program goals, in addition to your operational goals and so forth. But if you've seen 20% growth in the amount of kids you've served in a specific program over the last couple of years, I mean, what's your goal for 3 years from now? And that can be appealing to foundations because they're seeing you scale that program and they want to help you get it to the next level. So just something for program staff to think about And as Kyle said, making sure that your entire staff has a fundraising mindset, because without fundraising, your nonprofit's not going to go anywhere, right? So everyone kind of needs to be involved to a certain degree, and finding people's strengths and utilizing those strengths efficiently is important. But if program staff can put an emphasis on tracking data and being diligent about that, and then making sure it's available to advancement staff at any time, that's really helpful.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things to that. First, I have actually a lot of thoughts on that, but like Mallory said, we just need the details first of all, which is really like what are the core components of this program? What are the 3 things, the 4 things, and a paragraph on each? That's probably going to be enough detail for many proposals. Here's where we always fall short: stories. Like, give us a story, give us a couple of good stories. And that's often program staff sometimes aren't thinking that way. Advancement staff sometimes aren't thinking that way. But that's even for a foundation. You might think, oh, foundations are just as irrational as the rest of us. Okay, stories tug their heartstrings just like they do ours. They might present themselves as more data driven and rational in their giving. They're not necessarily. So get stories and include a story or two in your approaches. And your proposal material.
Testimony, a couple pictures of smiling faces, if that's what your program's focused on.
Yeah, kids especially.
Yeah.
So I would get stories of what Mallory said, like, what are the goals? How are we going to know if we're successful? What are the metrics that we're evaluating ourselves on here? And what are our goals? That's what we got to pull out. You really got to pull that out. And the best way to do that would be to get in the same room, or the same Zoom room if you have to right now. Get in the same room, development and program together, and just talk it out. You'll get more out of an hour together than you will try going back and forth on email or filling out forms or something like that.
Can I add one quick thing to that? Oftentimes, especially if a foundation has a website, they will list like grant updates or gifts that they've given in the past. Look at what they're highlighting in their reports that they're putting. So if they're highlighting like specific numbers of children reached or communities reached or whatnot, make sure that you have the numbers to back that up in your own kind of proposals and reports. If they're highlighting these particular stories or like a particular community or whatnot, follow their lead. Use what they've talked about with their previous grant updates and successes as a way to kind of guide how you're going to communicate to them about the projects that you're working on.
Very good. Well, any other? There's the only other question I'm going to type the answer is about platforms or software we recommend for budgets. Actually, I'll just say it since we're talking here. If you're, it's a good question. Thank you for it. If you're thinking specifically for building a budget to show to a foundation, typically you wouldn't need any sort of special software or platform. Now, that's different than what you need to run your organization, right? Of course, whatever accounting software you're using is good for that. But typically the kind of budget, we often say that like the budget you're showing to a foundation is a rhetorical device. It is not for the accountants, right? So you might want to present your budget to a foundation. It looks different than what your accountant is spitting at you and say, here's the budget. You might want to rearrange things a little bit, not saying fudge the numbers. I'm just saying rearrange things, relabel things that make them more rhetorical, compelling.
Don't have a miscellaneous column that has more than $5,000 or $10,000 in it. Don't have consultants or administrative and just like these vague line items, because those can be red flags to foundations. So try to just categorize those programmatically, really is what's good.
Yeah, and you don't have to break out like usually like $400 for phones, $125 for meals. You can kind of bunch that stuff. But yeah, just keep in mind that it's a rhetorical document. That's what I would say. I hope that answers the question. All right, we are at time. Okay, and we don't have any more questions. So I hope drive safely, everyone, if you were, and stay well. And thanks for joining us. Oh, wait, I'm supposed to pitch a couple things or make people aware. I already did the masterclass March 11th. If you're interested more on this, it gets really into depth and longer. So you might check that out, AmericanPhilanthropic.com. Was there something else, guys, I was supposed to talk about?
Gosh, master class for sure. I don't know if there was anything else. Let's see.
Yeah, well, we'll just leave it at that.
Send us an email if you have any questions.
Yeah, that's right. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Oh, there's a training. We have a in-person training in Scottsdale, Arizona, coming up in April. So if you're interested in a couple of days of good stuff just like this, beyond foundations, everything on fundraising, it's like elements of fundraising, I think is what we call it. It's like 101. Please also check out our website, AmericanPhilanthropic.com. And we'd love to see you there. Thank you.